Hello, my fellow readers. This is Dark Symphony 777 with another fan fiction review. As always, a link to the story will be in the description below. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel, click on that bell for notification, leave a comment in the comment section below on your thoughts to the story, and finally, this is my opinion. My opinion is not indicative of everyone in the world, so please respect that, as well as make sure to actually read the story before watching the review. So, let's get started. Shadowchasers Conspiracy, the longest story of the Shadowchaser series by Occam's Razor. No, we're not doing Tournament of Shadows yet. We're saving the best for last. Haha. And I have to say, my initial opinion of it is mixed. There are parts of it that I genuinely did like, but there are parts that I really didn't like. It's a really mixed feeling on it. Let's talk about the good. The characters. We have a lot of really entertaining characters. Well, on the cons, I get so clustered it's not even funny. But what about the plot? Let's actually start at the plot before we get into the characters and the nitty-gritty, because that's where both the pros and the cons mainly lie. So Conspiracy follows the idea of making people more aware of the field. Honestly, I don't even know the plot. Like, it's such a weird, clustered, contrived plot. It makes me wanted to get the plot is the main reason why I wanted to get this story over with before I review Tournament of Shadows next week. Because I can't really make heads or tails of the plot. So instead of focusing on a group like previous stories has done, this one focuses on the organization as a whole, as well as a mafia group headed by Yugioh Falchillo. Yeah, that's the best I can pronounce his name. And trying to stop a robot called Antithesis from destroying the veil of humanity and lifting their eyes, so that way the shadows and the awares can be gone. Like, it's really hard to just. I'm so flustered trying to say this out loud. I had my thought process all laid out, and then I was saying it out loud. I realized this doesn't make sense. The story kind of jumps from character to character with no rhyme or reason. There's so much going on. I mean, we have Sophia, who's a member of the Shadowchaser, who's trying to chase after her lover Philip, because he disappeared and he showed up, and then he's trying to disappear again, and she's like, no, I don't want that. And then we have Yugioh Falchillo, who gets a novel from a mysterious girl, and then BB Hood from Darkstalkers, of all things, show up to try and kill him. And meanwhile, they have to deal with this corporation called Kopek, who's the main bad guys. It's just such a really, how can I say it other than clustered? Cluttered. There's so much going on. At times, I couldn't really figure out what's going on compared to Tournament of Shadows, because I'm actually going to be comparing this to Tournament of Shadows, because Tournament of Shadows does everything that Conspiracy does right. It's the reason why I wanted to say Tournament of Shadows is by far the best story out of all the Shadowchasers stories. And part of that is down to it nails all the boxes, it does everything right, but this one tries to do the same thing, but completely, utterly fails at it. And this is something the author actually mentioned to me. He mentioned that the story was too ambitious for him, and thus it kind of fell apart. And I can see where he's coming from. It is very ambitious. It's a one-time story. It's like around 800. I actually have the page up. 850,000 minus all the alter zones and minus all the custom cards. I'm guessing actually 700,000 instead of 850,000, give or take around there. It's just really, really hard to make heads or tails on the entirety of the plot. Like there's like the story the story's kind of written in like a past, like the beginning and the end notes of each story is written from past tense from a character named Jen Muriel, who was introduced in Torment. There's stuff with nanites. There's stuff like the first couple of duels that they have. They're just a bunch of random shadows who are like kind of obsessed with like conspiracy theories. There's a guy who thinks Benedict Arnold is a good guy. I'm gonna save him. I'm gonna redeem him. And then when he finds out, it's like, dude, psycho. Like, perhaps I am psycho. I'll go to therapy. And it's really, really hard to keep track of everything. Compared, like, until the very end, there is like 2 plots. There's the Shadowchaser side of thing, and then there's Kavito's side of things. And I actually prefer Kavito's thing. His story is, compared to the Shadowchasers, very, very simplistic. He's basically a mafia boss. He has sort of a code of honor. He finds the girl. He saves her from like a hippie, an afro-looking guy, something like Mirror B or something like that. Gets a novel, and then his crew is hunted by BB Hood from Darkstalkers, and that's pretty much the entire thing. It's just him trying to hunt her while at the same time her trying to hunt him and his crew, and him trying to find out why is this book so important. We need to find out what this book's so important for. And compared to the Shadowchaser stories, is very straightforward, a very hunter-prey sort of relationship. And I prefer that over the main storyline. They do connect, but they connect so far in the story that it doesn't really matter for the most part. There leads us to the characters. Characters are just all over the place as well. I will say this: one of the characters from Torment, Carl, does redeem himself here. He works much better as a solo character rather than a character in a group, and I think that really benefits him. We got more character out of Jalal. We got Francis, who was Carl's actual replacement in the Torment crew. And he's alright. He gets like a friendship with Shiva from Mortal Kombat. Yeah, the story's weird. Like, that's another reason why the story's weird. There's just, you can't really call it a Yu-Gi-Oh story anymore because there's so many characters not from Yu-Gi-Oh. Like, there's BB Hood, Shiva, Freddy Krueger. Freddy Krueger actually wins a duel. Like, that's actually a short plot line where Karen from the Ascension crew shows up. She loses. She gets curbed up by Freddy Krueger of all people, using Dustins of all things. If you're a fan of Yu-Gi-Oh, you should know what Dustins are. And they have to set up a whole scenario where they have to go back in time to repeat the last duel, so that way Karen can actually beat Freddy Krueger and actually win. And Freddy Krueger's like, didn't we do this before? No. Alright. Mr. Smith from Matrix shows up, and he uses spirals, which is like an actual tier 0 deck. And his opponent's like, you have an army of super agents that are ultra competitive and basically made one of the few tier 0s in the deck. Yeah, I got a dinosaur. I had to do it. Outside of those two, you got Sophia and Philip. They're not really that good. You have Emily and Ferdinand, who are 2 of the villains. There's like the 2 main villains, and well, the 2 ones that show up the most often. They're alright as well. And then you have Antithesis, who is such I will have to say this, and I will have to actually spoil the ending of the story. He was such a cool concept, and oh, I really liked Antithesis. I think, bar none, he had the most potential to be the best villain in the entire and across all the Shadowchasers series. He had the most potential. They nearly ended, and then he went, and then this is why I'm spoiling it, because then when they beat him, it turns out there's another guy. This is something that's literally happened throughout across every single story except for Tournament of Shadows, and kind of Torment, because in the first Shadowchase story, when everyone thought, oh, we beat the bad guy, then there was another bad guy named Sanja behind that, manipulating everything, and her story is that she was the daughter of the Sphinx that caused Jalal to eventually get immortality, and she just wanted revenge for her mom dying. Okay. And then Power Primordial, we had the whole thing with Tharzadun, and his story was stretched along 3 stories. This story, Torment and Ascension, although he didn't really he wasn't the really big guy in Power Primordial. It was Terramandra, who was Hibina's boss. And when she's beaten, then we got the Aboleth, who at least was built up a little bit. It was still kind of disappointing. Then you had Torment, whose final battle was actually pretty much led up to it, which was Ben versus like a guy whose purpose was to revive Tharzadun. And then Ascension, the bad guy was Jalil, and he got taken over at the end by Tharzadun himself as an escape plan, because he realized, hey, I got this golem that's gonna open the door and try and kill me. I can use this. And basically, he kind of becomes the final villain at the end of Ascension. Kind of, sort of. It's more another avatar of him, but at least with Sanja, the Aboleth, and especially Tharzadun, they're at least make sense, and they're at least some build-up. Sanja's kind of like a weird one in the first one. And then you have this guy, Ragnora. It was just so out of place. I got the whole last chapter, the epilogue, it is supposed to explain why he's there, but it's just so ham-fisted, because the author spent so much time building up Antithesis as like this really cool villain, and trust me, he was a really, really cool villain, and I really liked Antithesis. And seeing him just completely jobbed out the way in the story he is really disappointing. It's probably the worst part of the story, the fact that the author took such a cool concept with Antithesis being this angelic robot that's obsessed with law. Like, the whole point of his species is they're supposed to maintain law across the multiverse, and he kind of got some damage, and when he was repairing himself, he basically the parts that he was using to repair himself was basically corrupted, and basically caused him to go out of control and slowly want to do law and order to the absolute extreme. And that's so cool, especially since his story is locked behind the journal that Kavito had the entire time. He's a really cool character. I'll talk more about him when I get to the end. There's also Eden. Eden's kind of a waste of time. She's basically the character that gave Kavito the book, so she has some purpose. It's just she's just nothing. And for the most part, the other characters are really just there. There are other villains. It is a big group, but Ferdinand, Emily, Antithesis, and that's it. That's really the only ones worth talking about. The rest of them are just there for the most part. They're really just there. Grammar errors. Same grammar errors as always, so lots and lots of mixing names up. Nothing new. Pacing. This one's actually probably would have been the best paced, if not for being so ambitious that it kept cutting across everything, and the clutterness that ensued from this level of over ambitiousness that the author had of wanting to make this a big sort of finale, this big celebration of, you know, giving love to the organization as a whole rather than individual members. It kind of fell apart because there's just first off, there's no main character. The closest thing we have is Sophia, and then she's kind of cut like part way through, and then it becomes Carl, and then it becomes Francis, and then it becomes Cavito, and then it becomes Eden. And there's just no really central figure compared to Tournament of Shadows. Next story, where it had 5 characters: Ember, Natalie, Kenshin, Ace, and Bruno, as well as Allison Despairland. Out of all 5 of those, that one's done better because the story kind of keeps those cycling through those 5 specific characters. And even then, Bruno's throughout the entire story is pretty obviously the most important character, to the point where you can reasonably call him the main character in that story because he has all the biggest moments and he's the one who's kind of connected to a large portion of the plot. And I like Bruno. but the main reason is he's kind of the gel that holds most of the story together, so you can reasonably call that. With this story, there's nothing. There's no really main character. Every time we try and get a central character, it switches to another character and sticks on them for a little bit, and then it just moves on. It's just so fragmented. I think it's really bad. Sorry, Occam. It's better than Ascension. Not as good as Torment or Tournament of Shadows. Would I recommend this story? I do think the plot itself, as really hard to describe as it is, with all the conspiracy undertones and all these pieces that are moving around throughout the entire story, it is, if you're able to figure out everything, it's a decent story. And the characters, while being all over the place, the ones that are good are really good, combined with the fact that Cavito for Kilo's story is at least not fragmented, because they're mainly stick together for the most part, so it at least makes sense. I would recommend it. Barely recommend it, because it's good, not that good. I put it average. Favorite part, I would like to say my favorite part is probably the final duel at the end, the live stream duel. Like, I'm not even joking. So, in order for Antithesis' plan, and I'm spoiling the end of the story. Sorry, just skip this. Antithesis wants to doesn't have enough energy in order to finish his plan, which is create total law. So he challenges 3 of the duelists, with him and Ferdinand and a third person, to a 3v3 duel, and he goes, "No, we're gonna stream it on YouTube." And they're like, can you do that? It's like, he already has this stuff set up. Oh, shit. That's why I like it. He was so cool. But yeah, that whole duel was a really, really good duel, especially since Antithesis started bringing up the Cleaforts. And honestly, the Cleaforts is where we have to draw a line and go straight into what would I fix. Let's get the elephant out of the room first. I want to talk about this specific thing first. Pendulum Monsters. I'm really divisive on how the author used Pendulum Monsters introduced Pendulum Monsters in the way it was used. With Antithesis using the Cleaforts, fine, that makes sense. Having that at least kind of makes sense from a thematic standpoint because, you know, he's supposed to be the final villain. He busts out something they never seen before, and thus they would have to be able to deal with that. That's fine. But to put this in perspective, pendulums were actually introduced with Eden's duel with Emily near the end. Emily has the Chaos Ancient Gear Giant out. And she goes, "There's nothing you can do to stop me." And then, out of nowhere, Eden says, "I got something." And then she busts out Full Cult's Canyon and Flash Knight. And I'm actually befuddled why the author thought this was a good idea. In the story, it makes sense. Because a big part of the plot thing Antithesis did was he infested the Shadowchaser members with nanites. And they used dual monsters in order to heal them, but then he upgraded them. And then she goes, "Well, the only way to do it is to use Pendulum." It sounds like a really cool idea on paper, since the regular monsters didn't really do anything, but used Pendulum Monsters to basically act as a super cure to get rid of the nanites. On paper, that doesn't sound like a bad idea, especially once you take into context, you know, the whole story of Arc V. In practice, it comes off as a very, very forced Deus Ex Machina. It comes off as so forced. It gives off the impression that the author wanted to hold off pendulums as much as he could, and he only really added in pendulums because he had no choice but to do it. And it's like, well, I gotta do it now. And then just decided to shelve pendulums with no rhyme or reason into the story, and it just comes off as just the most ham-fisted thing ever. I did not like the implementation of Pendulum Monsters in the story at all. With Antithesis, it made sense with this whole idea of Law and Order, especially since his deck, specifically Cleaforts, actually makes sense in the context of his character. So I would have been okay with him being the only character to use pendulums, because, again, it makes sense since he's using Cleaforts and they actually fit his character to T. But let's go back. How to make the pendulums in that duel between Emily and Eden make sense. Foreshadow. It would have been an easy thing for early on in the story, or even Eden herself, saying that there's gonna be they're introducing some kind of new mechanic and certain people got it, but I want to save it for a special time. There are tons of ways you could have foreshadowed Pendulum Monsters to have it when they appear first. Excuse me. That when they appear, it feels very natural. Or better yet, you just cut them all out and not have pendulums at all. Or hell, you could have just, you still could have had the Clees, but But if you didn't have the cleaves, what would you switch to next with? You know, that brings up a whole nightmare of ideas. But it's either, like I said, either cut out all the pendulums, or you foreshadow pendulums way before the duel even happens. 2, get rid of Terra Ironhoof. I hate that character. That character basically adds nothing to the story. I don't know why the author kept adding her. Like, she's basically a feminist minotaur. I can't really make heads or tails of Terra Ironheart's character. I'm just guessing feminist minotaur because that's kind of the best description I can think of. But the problem is she contributes nothing to the story. When she first appears, okay, she sews up. She basically tries to hammer home a gate blocker to open a gate to let some of the Shadowchasers get back home. She tricks a bad guy who's guarding it to blow it up, and she leaves. That's fun. Okay, fine. She contributed to the plot at least a little bit. And then the author kept bringing her back. Why did the author keep bringing her back? And then just not do anything with the character. Like, if you're going to use her, make use of her. Like, have her contribute to the story. But outside of that first appearance, she contributes nothing. Nada. Zilch. Nothing. Either make her more important to the story, or just cut her. Like, that's just get rid of all her parts, except for the first part in the cemetery. You can literally not change anything about the plot when you remove all her other parts. That's how irrelevant to the story she is outside of that first appearance. That irrelevant. 3, get rid of that duel with Ragnoa. It really would have been so perfect to have a final duel instead of Philip and Sophia dueling Ragnora. They duel Antithesis. That would have been the better ending, because again, Antithesis was built up so perfectly. To have him kind of jobbed out like that, because when he loses, it doesn't take it well, and then all the Shadowchasers just beat the shit out of him, and then he dies because Kavito basically pulls out a magnum and gets him. Okay. Okay. I kid you not, when I saw that, thought that was the end. It's like, oh, is the next story gonna be the epilogue? And then it's like, no, it's not the epilogue. It's gonna continue on. And I'm like, oh no, not again, not the whole extra bad guy showing up for no apparent reason again. Oh, this was the worst one. But going back to anything else fixing, I think probably the easiest way to fix this story is do what the... Oh, come on, I'm talking to you. Do what you're doing with the Shackle City. Have it be a loose collection of stories that kind of explore a different facet of each plot point. Like, you can have a story focusing on Convito, you can have a story focusing on Philip and Sophia, kind of solve it and trying to fix her thing, and what this do is it'll create an umbrella story that each story kind of loosely connects some way through the idea of conspiracy theories. And then once you finish setting up everything with these stories, then you have a second part where they all meet and they go against Antithesis. That would probably be the best plot. Like, you have probably like five stories, and then a sixth one being their complete battle against Antithesis. That would have been so perfect. Where they have to find out about Kopek, they meet Baby Habani Hood, maybe have a story with Francis, maybe a story focusing on Francis, a story focusing on Carl, a story focusing on, again, Philip and Sophia, Kavito, have a story focusing on Jalal. it is probably the best way you could have handled this. And even then, you could have had a story focusing on Eden, and you could have used that specific story to build up the kind of massively foreshadowed Pendulum Monsters. You know, there's still the issue of Tara Ironhoof. Like, sorry, but she's really got to go. She's just nothing. And that would be it. I do like conspiracy. I do think it had a lot of good in it, but it also had a lot of bad in it as well. If I had a favorite, no wait, there is one moment that I do want to mention, and that is the fact that Jalal, the half dragon leader of the Shadowchasers, somehow ended up in the boss arena of Ornstein Smell. I actually like that shit, especially with the idea of Jalal basically German suplexing Smo halfway into the ground. I thought that was hilarious. And he's like, "Mind if I get a smoke?" Yeah, I don't think you mind. I like Jalal. He grew on me finally in this story. But yeah, conspiracy. It is overly ambitious, but I do think some of its parts are equal, at least a good enough story to, I would say, go right ahead and read it. So, this has been Dark Symphony 777. I'll see you next time, and